Dear delegates, I have a special opportunity and privilege of introducing our next speaker, our president, Andrew Morrill. When I was asked to describe him, I started thinking about some of these words that would describe him, and I thought of shy, timid, quiet. Oh wait, that's the wrong person. Then the word proud came to my mind, and I can think of 3 things that he is very proud of. He's proud to be a dad of 5. 2 of his kids go to Chandler Unified School District. Woohoo! He's an English teacher from Marana, and I know he misses it every day. He's currently a teacher on special assignment with us, doing the work, duties as assigned by the AEA. And then there's this 3rd thing, something about being a wildcat. I don't get. There, see? I don't get it. Then another word that came to my mind was intimidating. But that word only comes to mind when it comes to people who are non-public school believers. Why? Because he's knowledgeable and educated about the issues. He's articulate. He's got a gift of discourse. Unyielding is the other one, because he's always doing what is right for kids, what's right for public school, and what's right for public school employees. Instead of intimidating, I think of the word champion. To us, he's our voice and our advocate. He is willing to have those tough conversations, build relationships for change and support for public schools, kids, and success of our public schools. And he calls out those non-believers on their BS. Stubborn is the other word. Again, to those non-believers, because again, he's unyielding to do what is right for kids, what's right for public schools, and he's uber smart. I would use the word passion, because he knows firsthand what it is to be in our shoes. He has a vested interest as a teacher, as a parent, as a resident of this great state. He is our voice for great public schools for all kids. Please help me welcome our champion, our leader, our president, Andrew Morrill.
Wow. Well, thank you very much. I really think I probably just ought to sit down. Why ruin an introduction like that? Good evening. Thank you, Madam Treasurer. Joe, thank you. Members of the board, and obviously to the AEA staff at all levels. We're joined on stage by our interim executive director, Renee Costa, and we will have an exciting announcement later on this evening about AEA's incoming executive director. And I want to thank each and every one of you for your membership, for your own championship of stewards of public education, and thank you for being here. Now, what I would really like is if anybody who's a first-time delegate, or let's say a member or in education for the first couple of years, to stand up, and you're going to be standing for a second, so just do it, please. Right now, let's go. Now stay standing. Stay standing. Don't you sit down. Don't sit down. Stay standing. If you think you're nervous, try it from up here. A long time ago, I was a classroom teacher myself. I taught high school English, and I loved it. And I don't get to do that anymore. But I was your colleague before probably many of you were, even thinking about education. And now I get to represent this organization to you. and tell you that the people you're seated next to are your advocates. I went from being a colleague to an advocate. That means I get to speak out for what you do, what you believe in, what you're trying to do for your students in places that you can't be. But I am not the only one. You have joined an organization that is your advocate and your championship, and these people are seated next to you because they believe in what you do. They believe in who you are. They want you, and I want you to stay in this profession, not be overwhelmed, not be drowned, but find the realization of your own values, what brought you into this profession. We want you to stay, because as you stay, you will get better and better and better, and you will get to the real heart of what these professions are all about, that we lump together and say either educator or in public education. So have a seat now, and thank you for being part of this organization. Now, to anybody who was here last year, which is not here, it's there here over in Mesa, and I'm not going to ask if you took the wrong directions and got over there to about Alma School and went, "Ocean!" But you know you did. I gave a long address last year. It was pretty long. I know this because when I got done, Joe said, that's pretty long. And then Nydia said, it was good. It's pretty long. And some of the staff, some of you, throughout the year, would say, do you think it'll be that long this year? So I went on YouTube. Damn, the speech is on YouTube. And it was 45 minutes. And I blame you. Why did you let me go on for 45, not you new people, it's not your fault. Got you out of the way first. 45 minutes. Jesus, I couldn't believe it. Yeah, well, you know. You know, that's rounded on one end. So, not going to do that this year. And in fact, I wanted to make good on the promise. So I'm going to give you my speech in one sentence. Right off the bat, if you're that bottom line kind of person, cut to the chase, here it comes. Despite national and state shifts that have undermined the investment of public education and shaken a lot of confidence of those who work in public education, there are clear signs that things can turn. Things are turning, and improvements are going to be made right here in the state. And semicolon, and if we exercise the leadership of our professions in all their dimensions, we can lead the way to a better Arizona through public education, and we can pursue the vision of a great public school for every child. Thank you. Good night. I see we have a little bit more time. Let me put it another way. For 1.2 million reasons, for every student you may come into contact with now in whatever your role, and all the students you may come into contact with, for every student across Arizona, because you know it's sort of an accident that you have the ones that you have under your charge, in a classroom, in your hallways, on a school bus, for all of them. It is time for us to remember the enormity and the importance of the work that we do. Not as a retreat, but just remember how important it all is. Because then we have to go quickly to what it will take for all of us to stand together and build the education world we need now for the world that we want to create for all those students tomorrow. Because that's what the education world today does. Because that's what you do. And the next time you're at some cocktail party, and it will probably be in Maricopa County, and it will probably be in Scottsdale, and somebody asks you, what do you make? Annoy them. Develop a snooty attitude and say, I make tomorrows. I'm an engineer of the future, and I'm way ahead of you. And it's crazy. Maybe it is. A little audacious. I think we need a little bit of audacity ourselves, and we need to call ourselves into action. Because it hasn't been easy, has it? Has it? No. So I think we ought to act like crazy. I don't know if it was Soren Kierkegaard, Jean-Paul Sartre, or James T. Kirk, but one of them said, in an insane world, the sane mind must appear insane. And why not? This is Arizona. We do crazy better than any state in the country. We export it right to the Daily Show. If crazy is the law of the Arizona land, then let's let it be our crazy, because educator crazy is the best kind of crazy there is. And the most intense kind of educator crazy is middle school crazy. Now, these are degrees of good crazy, not bad crazy. We don't want bad crazy. If you think you want bad crazy, talk to our delegates from Gilbert. Gilbert knows bad crazy. Not going to make you stand this year, I promise. I said I wouldn't do that this time. I wanted to. Gilbert crazy is scary crazy. Gilbert crazy is batshit crazy. Gilbert crazy is governing board saying we do our best work between 12 midnight and 2 a.m. Crazy, where no one's really watching, except that the Gilbert Education Association is. And last year I did have them stand. I told them we would not leave them alone. We haven't. And we will work and continue to work with them and everybody else that's dealing with bad crazy. We need Jim Collins crazy. You know Jim Collins crazy? Now there's two parts to Jim Collins crazy. He wrote the book Good to Great, and the first part is you got to confront the brutal truth of where you are. Confront the ugly, awful, brutal truth of where you are. And then match it with the optimism that with the right people we can get through that and we can flourish. I don't think that goes far enough for us right now. I think we have to add a third part. We have to add the resolve. You can't just have optimism if you're not going to put behind it some action. Because things will get better. We're going to talk about that a little bit tonight. But we can't be bystanders to that slow, steady, incremental change. We can't afford to wait, and our students and our families in Arizona certainly can't. So let's look at the brutal truth. I want to suggest that there are three rising tides that are swirling around us, not just locked to Arizona, but nationally, that make the work feel very different. Now, if you have not been teaching that long, you may not have noticed the trend, but your colleagues have. So when I say at the beginning that I want you in this profession, we all want you to stay in this profession, not as indentured servitude, but because you want to choose to be in this profession and grow into the profession, so that you too can display the kind of madness that we all have given into, that everybody picks up on. We are, after all, as a profession, not possibly the inventors of happy hour, but the perfecters of it, certainly. To many of us, the ground does feel shaky, not as firm as it used to. What I want to tell you, folks, never spin an AEA member. 1, 100, 1,000, it's just better to put it all out there and deal with it together. You're not imagining that it feels different. It is different. It's not your commitment waning. It's not you flatlining in your career. You're not in burnout. It feels different because it is different. And we're going to have to decide what to do about that. But you're not imagining it. You understand? It didn't just fall out of you and out of your soul one day to be a great educator, to be a great education support professional. Don't give in to that thought. We always want to point the accusations inward sometimes because we're all so accommodating. You aren't crazy. If you are, you're crazy, crazy, educator crazy. But what we really are, we're the mirrors for what's happened in society far, far upstream from us. And we can decide very, very simply to stay the mirrors, or we can decide to be the lamps to a better way. Public education is subversive. It always has in its back pocket the ace of subversion, because it's always producing people capable of challenging the status quo. But here is where the status quo is right now. We are under, in this country, a giant economic shift that began with a rhetorical and political campaign that tells us that all taxes are fundamentally evil. Even the word tax, it ends with that most sinister of letters, it's got to be bad. And there's been a very successful campaign to convince us that all taxes are somehow bilkings of the taxpayers. The U.S. has the lowest income tax rates it's ever had. The tax, no matter how low taxes get, we still refer to them as burdens. And any politician, it seems, in any insulated district need but make one claim: I will lower your taxes, and all other agenda items stand behind that one claim. And too many people stop evaluating the quality of the candidate. 46 out of 50 states are operating in a multi-year structural deficit. Almost all the tax cuts, and by the way, Arizona, 20 out of 22 of the last years, tax cuts passed by the legislature, without a thought to what would happen in the future. Most of these were passed on two promises, neither of which came to fruition. The first was that personal income would go up. In states that cut those taxes, stands to reason, if there's fewer taxes, your income must go up. The problem is they were disproportionate cuts, and they always have been, with the wealthiest receiving by far and away the vast majority of the benefit of those. What did happen, rather than everybody's per capita personal income going up, if you've seen the studies, you know that CEO salaries of some of the major companies in the United States are now at 350 to 450 times the average worker at the lower end of that same company. Imagine that. I can't fathom that. In the 70s, it was 30 to 40 times. The CEO, God love him or her, the CEO of a company, different role, greater authority, made more money. But not 350 to 450 times. So what happened? The average salary has gone up, because averages are fundamentally deceptive. If Bill Gates walks into this room tonight, we're all millionaires on average. Do you feel like a millionaire? Let me put it in slightly different terms. If you go home to your kitchen and you turn on the stove and you place your hand on the burner and then you put the other hand in the freezer, on average, you're very comfortable. Averages are a deception. And the result of all these tax cuts is the same across every state. These states are not able to afford their own public education systems. So you got to look way upstream. We bring the picture to Arizona, and it's like putting that issue under a magnifying glass. Arizona is a low-tax state. You ever hear people from Ohio, Michigan, Illinois, maybe New York, get off the plane to get here? They put their bags down and say, my, the property taxes sure are low here. What's up with the schools? There might just be a fundamental relationship between available revenue and what's going on as an investment in our school system. I think so, because since 1995, Arizona has cut $2.5 billion with a B dollars from its general fund. We have lived the futility of these tax cuts and their empty promises. K-12 public education in Arizona, believe it or not, is still the largest expenditure of the general fund. And it's like that in just about every state. It is the largest expenditure. So when you cut $2.5 billion out of the general fund in that period of time, you cannot help but visit the cuts on public education. That just happens. And those of us who've been around for a while can set our clocks. When the legislature cuts taxes, as they did in the middle of a recession in 2009, we knew that cuts to public education would follow 1 to 2 years later. We knew it like clockwork, and sure enough, it happened. As a result, in the period of time in Arizona between 2008 and 2013, we removed $1.5 billion from K-12 education funding. You're not imagining that things are different. Things are different. We no longer have the ability to afford the system that we need. We started out in 2008 with the lowest per pupil funding in the country, arguably, and then we enacted what are documented as the largest cuts. But it wasn't just public education that took the hit. The middle class has taken the hit as well, because public education is generally a mirror of what's going on in the middle class. And their earning power, our earning power, since we are all members of the middle class, we hope, is down as well. Middle class salaries have flatlined nationally in a 30-year trough, not keeping up with inflation, not keeping up with any elements of the cost of living. The middle class in America does not have the earning power it once had. With state revenue down, higher education is becoming less and less attainable. States are cutting the funds to public universities, and they are raising their tuitions. Corporate grants are drying up. Public grants are drying up. Scholarships are drying up. As a result, higher ed is becoming less and less attainable to members of the middle class. And you see this in the eyes of parents, I'm convinced, because I hear it from a lot of you. Parents are seeming more and more desperate when they talk about the education challenges their children are facing. The middle class is feeling a fear it hasn't felt in decades. Home foreclosures up absurdly in the state of Arizona. So put it together. Members of the middle class, whose students and children we educate, are earning less, not keeping up with bills. They don't see a path to their own children going to higher ed, and they are feeling the fear of possibly even losing their home, one paycheck away. That's why in their eyes is a fear and disquiet. And they look to you. They look to us. We were always prepared for the stakes of the challenges of educating children. I don't know that we were prepared for the desperation that is now visiting itself on all of our interactions with parents. And the thing to me that bothers me just the most about living in America right now is that we are on the brink of creating a generation with less education attainment than the generation previous for the first time in the history of our country. That is not only unfathomable, it's unpatriotic, it's un-American. It violates the very concept of opportunity. And because it was largely manufactured, it's unethical. Never should have happened in the first place. That's the first shift, economic. The second is political, because if taxes are bad, then any public enterprise funded by taxes must immediately be suspicious. It follows automatically. So we're seeing a shift from public enterprise, public engineering of education, where the expertise is, to private profit, coming on a growing suspicion of any public entity. And we feel this too in the media and in the rhetoric of our elected policymakers. They have fueled a choice market as if choice is the only way out. And they pick on the most vulnerable populations that most need strong, well-funded public schools, and they sell them this bill of goods. And privatization, lo and behold, is always held up as the answer. Privatize, privatize. It's the privatized rhetorical wheel, spinning and rolling over every public enterprise. They tried it with Social Security some years ago. It didn't work. And now they will try to roll through public schools. And the wheel spins like this. First, you get market experts that lay out a plan to tilt the playing field away from whatever is number one. In this case, public education, neighborhood, district, schools. Choice and reforms, or choice options and reforms, begin to chip away at the edges of the number one market shareholder. That's us. Funding, which we've already talked about, drying up in states, funding is always attached to the reforms. It's already decreasing, and districts find themselves starving for funds. So private grants from the Gates Foundation and others, public grants from Race to the Top, school improvement grants, teacher innovation grants, become very, very attractive, and we accept the terms with them. And the reforms almost always include narrowing definitions of success, and the success is increasingly measured by narrower and narrower indicators, which is how we get standardized test scores as the driver of every major decision. That's how the wheel turns. The test scores in turn then drive high-stakes decisions, accountability, closures and takeovers, got to close schools or we've got to turn them over to our charters. Charter schools are an interesting hybrid, publicly funded, so technically public schools, but privately owned, where the assets, once turned over, become the private assets of those who own the charters. $850 million in Arizona, publicly funded through taxpayer dollars, now in the private hands of those who hold the charters of charter schools in Arizona. Almost $1 billion. But the choice options, as the penalties get more and more stringent, as the consequences get more and more extreme, notice the choice options are always held exempt from the most dire of consequences. This is why in the, I will not call them empowerment scholarship, whatever they are vouchers, and the Goldwater Institute drove those. This is why voucher proponents would rather kill a bill in a legislative session than have accountability measures attached to it. So, for instance, one of the most effective ways we can use to slow the growth of vouchers is to go into legislative session and say, okay, you want to expand vouchers, then anybody who takes one must take the state standardized assessments that all public schools must take. And you know what happens? The proponents kill their own bills. They will sacrifice their own momentum before they will put their performance out in the light of day. So the choice rhetoric masks a privatizing agenda, and that takes us to the third shift. I think you probably feel this one as a practitioner most of all. And that is the ebbing and flowing away from district governing boards to state and federal government levels for decisions about education design and education delivery. It feels like our own expertise is slipping away in terms of the decision making. And here's the bad news. It would have been wonderful to be able to pin this all on one political party, blame George Bush for the whole thing, and say, No Child Left Behind started it. Well, it did. In many, many ways, No Child Left Behind started it. And as much as I love the guy, Obama and the Duncan administration turbocharged it with Race to the Top. You can't blame one party without holding the other one accountable also, and both parties are playing in this, and that's especially disturbing to folks like us. No Child Left Behind from Bush, Race to the Top from Obama, whichever one you're talking about had three effects, three impacts. Both represent a shift in where education decisions are really being made. Both have been used as an excuse by the Arizona legislature to wrest decision-making away from governing boards where we had access to them through contract negotiations, bargaining, committees. You've sat on some of those yourself, evaluation design. The problem is more and more of the parameters of those designs have already been determined and are sitting in state statutes and federal laws, U.S. DOE guidelines. Some of them are good, but they are so far removed from students where the best decisions are made. So both were wrested by the state legislature in Arizona, which is a problem because the state legislature in Arizona has become more and more politically extreme. It might look different if they were more embracing of the accumulated expertise in our education ranks, but they haven't been. And third, both of these policy directions have opened the door for an industry of private vendors. When people talk about the privatization of public education, I think sometimes they imagine tanks rolling down the streets and taking out the Marana Unified School District Governing Board, or the, well, not the Gilbert Board, we won't talk about that, but some of these others. It's not going to happen that way, folks. It's not going to be that dramatic. Makes for a great miniseries, all right? But it's not going to go that way. The privatization is happening in like 1,000 cuts. Have you noticed how many vendors your district is now doing business with on matters of curriculum design, instructional delivery, assessment design, formative assessments, summative assessments? Those decisions, those instruments used to be designed by us. To a degree they still are. To a degree they still are. But more and more the vendors come in. You need to raise test scores? We've got the reading instruction program for you. You need to raise your test scores? We've got the professional development package for you. You need to raise test scores? We've got the formative assessment and the summative assessment strategy. We've got Galileo, Pearson, ACT just ready to go. You know what those companies are doing in Washington, D.C.? They hire lobbyists to do business with Congress and keep the pressure on standardized tests as the accountability indicators. So that at the same time they're marketing the package, they are creating the need at the other end. It's brilliant, in a way. So we get corporate reforms. We hear a lot about corporate reforms. What does this really mean? Well, the dilemma of corporate reforms is that we are a business. We are a business. Thank you for not throwing me off this stage. We are a business. There are a lot of people that don't like that, but we're a business unlike any other. We don't compare well with other businesses. We don't make a product, we create an individual, and it doesn't translate well. So most of the corporate reforms that come in revolving tightly around standardized test scores, as if they were vacuum cleaner sales in a quarterly report, they miss that unique aspect of business that we're in. And since they don't get it, they tend to dismiss it. And we do that. That's human nature. If you don't really understand the intricacies of something, you very often pretend it's not very important. We know otherwise. We have a unique workplace. It turns out that you take a teacher of the year like Nancy over here. You know, Nancy was in a moment a brilliant teacher and probably would be anywhere she went. But there is a fundamental nexus of connections between Nancy as the educator, the classroom environment, the district she operated in, the subjects she was teaching, the students in the classrooms. And you can't just pull out the cogs and put them any which way and assemble the success again. Would you agree? But it seems so neat and tidy. And so the corporate reforms visit us through ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council. Oh, you've heard of them, haven't you? Well, keep going. I like that. That's very good. They come to us through the Goldwater Institute, an organization so dishonest that it lies about lobbying. It just does. They're a lobbying group. I don't know why they don't just come out and say, we're an education group. We throw the words union and association around all the time. We can't decide which one we are. Half of you want this to be a union, the other half, I'm an association member. We're both. We're both. It's DNA, it's double helix, it's science. Corporate reforms want to champion test scores. More and more curricular mandates made at the state level. Personnel decisions creating evaluation processes that are needlessly complex. Needlessly complex. Having lost sight of the very purpose of evaluation, which is to improve our own performance. But laboring under all these requirements, checklists, and the expediency of using them for dismissal, they collapse and don't even come close to their design. Again, many of you have achieved an amazing amount of success in your evaluation designs. We see it all over the state. But you shouldn't have to do that in spite of the state and with your districts. So, troublingly, more and more of these corporate reforms come with a check ready to be cashed. And because districts find themselves so cash-starved, they have a way of being both the carrot and the stick. But the most troubling aspect of all this is the affective toll it's taking on us, taking on you, taking on the folks that we want to remain our colleagues, long into the future where they become better and better and better at what they do. They have created of educators consumers. Worse yet, in the minds of some, they've created educators into culprits rather than the answers. And public education in America has always been the answer. That's why it feels different, because these trends have shifted things so. And I regret that so many people now tell me, I think I might be on the wrong path. It doesn't feel like maybe this was my calling after all. 20 and 25-year educators saying, I don't think I can do this anymore. I got to go. I have a daughter who is in her master's program at the University of Utah, which means Arizona beat her twice this year in basketball. Anyway, though, she texted my wife and me just this week. Said, I got a friend that is in the education program, but now she's not sure she wants to be a teacher. And my wife, who's Dr. Pam now, yeah, she got her doctorate, and oh my God. You know, I knew I was the second best English teacher in my household. I didn't really need the reminder. Anyway, Pam was filling the text message triangle with all these reasons to become an educator, and my tongue was a stone. I felt like the biggest pessimist in the world. I was just trying to create a realistic, sort of accurate, well, you know, she might want to consider these things, and it sounded so that's not me. I loved my time in the classroom. It was a while ago. It's different now. Your vice president is living that with a foot in both worlds. He'll tell you a little bit about that later tonight. I just can't get over the idea that some of our folks are buying into this rhetoric like maybe they're part of the problem. Maybe their commitment's not strong enough. Maybe your motivation isn't enough. Yes, it is. You are on the right path. You are on the right path. But the path needs some heavy maintenance. It's the path that needs a little redirecting, a little repair. Now, if we stop right at this point, you get 20 minutes of your life back. We got a long way to go tonight, though. But here's the problem. Then we're only confronting the brutal truth. We're not talking about any of the optimism or the path out of all of this. The problem with that is the path, once again, has to be built by us. You've heard all along in statewide media, rhetoric, and national rhetoric that the only answer is education, so get ready. Because if I stop right here, then we're only half crazy, and half crazy isn't good enough if you're an educator. You got to be full crazy. You got to be all the way crazy. That's the only way you can do this work. This is the best crazy there is. You're either in or out. You're either the, what did somebody once tell me? You're either the ham or the eggs, the pig or the chicken. And I went just like, I can hear the side, what? He said, well, think about it. The chicken just passes the egg through. But if you're the pig and you're making ham, it's a great trick. You can only do it once. We got to be all the way crazy. Every person in this room, because, you know, this is a great moment. We all walk out of here and we feel pretty good. What's it going to look like a week from now? What's it going to look like a month from now? What are the conversations you're going to have with your colleagues? Because we're going to have to determine where we are in this. And doing your job as an excellent educator, an excellent education support professional, this being the only organization in the state that I know of that dares to put a core value out there that says, if you don't know the value of education support professionals, then you don't have the full picture of what an education community has to look like. We're the only organization that goes on record for saying that, because we're the only organization that truly is in the trenches of public education. Doing your job well ought to be enough. Doctors, architects, lawyers, engineers are celebrated for doing their work. It ought to be enough to educate well from any role. It isn't. We are involved in a political enterprise. If that bothers you, your name's on the contract. You walked into a political dynamic the moment you put your name down, the moment you agreed to work in a public school district. An educator-led, student-centered agenda, which Dennis will talk to you about tomorrow, requires work. The fortunate thing is we have a growing pool of assets behind us. Assets behind us? Never saw that coming. Think about it. Yeah. First, you. I want to tell you something right now. The public has not bought the rhetoric. The public is still on your side. The public still instinctively, intuitively, and with good reason, still looks at you as the solution. They have not bought the Fox spin that somehow public education is a dodge of accountability. The public is very much invested in your success. Expect More Arizona did polling just a few months ago, and Arizonans indicated they were dissatisfied with the public education system in this state. That sounds bad. You know what their number one beef was? We are not investing enough money into the public education system to allow educators to succeed and flourish. The communities are not fooled. Because you demonstrate values on your sleeves. You are walking value codes. You have a magnanimity of your character that brought you into this profession and is with you to measure and degree every single day. And the public doesn't see that all that often. You are the last adults that interact with students and try to sell them nothing more than a better understanding of themselves, a better version of themselves. There is no other enterprise in America that does that. There are enterprises that save lives in a moment. Emergency responders. When everybody else flees a burning building, they're the ones running in. They save lives in a moment. We save them over time. And we build them, shape them. You stay in this field long enough, you will have saved a life whether you know it or not. And this resonates very deeply. So much so that when you ask people about the state of public education in America, they express grave doubt. Because it's an institution. When you ask them about the education system in their community, the confidence level goes way up. Why do you suppose that is? Because they know you. Because you're a member of their community. When you ask about individual educators, they know the confidence goes even higher. You are some of the most important people in their worlds. And when folks are surveyed about the professions in whom they place the most trust on a variety of issues, educators come up as one of the top two every single time. We aren't an institution. We are real human beings that can achieve incredible contact with parents. Now, the irony is, I used to love this about being a teacher, the irony is America loves what we do and they don't understand it. You get your hair cut. Most of you. You get your hair cut, and somebody will ask you what you do. You're in line at the doctor, you're standing in front of a receptionist at the doctor's office. What do you do? Oh, I'm a teacher. I work in a public school. Silence. I don't know how you can do that. How do you do that? I have seen 6'5" guys walk through the Chandler Fashion Mall at 7 o'clock on a Friday evening into the food court where the nuclear collider of adolescent hormones is blowing up. There's a meltdown and they are afraid. You'd walk right through there. It wouldn't bother you at all. That's your world, baby. You wouldn't bat an eye. Sit down. Educator crazy. Best crazy there is. This is the reason why you have to take your stories out. People love them. They love to hear crazy stories about what's happening in schools. I don't love to see the headlines sometimes that our colleagues create. But nobody can believe half the stuff that goes on in our public schools, and I want you to cheer up a little bit and put things in perspective. Socrates is widely regarded as like the smartest human being in Western civilization history. Socrates was an Athenian philosopher and scholar, and he had a habit of teaching some of the members of Athens, the city-state of Athens, in or about the 4th century B.C. Now, the numbers are backwards on that side of the timeline. It always trips me up. Socrates was brilliant. He's responsible for the Socratic method, the dialectic of philosophy, and some of the greatest contributions to just mental prowess in the last 2,000 years. Fine. But he went in for his post-evaluation conference one time, and it didn't go well. And he said, "Am I being renewed?" And they said, "No, we want to kill you." And then, he must have taught English because he wrote an essay on why that was probably the right thing to do. 2 lessons out of this. Nobody's ever understood. Nobody's ever understood exactly what we do in the worst post-observation conference in the history of educators. And second, the smartest man in the world forgot to take his union representative in with him to the meeting. You are an asset. The power of what you do translates and transfers to people at the speed of values. Because that is what America still associates with the enterprise of public education, and you are its champion. And if public education is truly one of the cornerstones of this democracy, then you are on the forefront of patriotism also. It stands to reason. Second thing going for us, there is a great disturbance in the force. Now, we have so many of the conservative majority party in our legislature that an interesting thing is happening, and I can't decide how to rank these, so I'm just going to go kind of chicken and egg with you. There is a progressive structure called Arizona Wins that you're going to be hearing a lot about. AEA and NEA are partners, and the design, the intent of this Arizona Wins, this intricate political network that is being built across the state of Arizona, has one thing on its mind: accelerate the pace at which we either moderate Arizona back to its proper balance or make it a blue state. For the first time, it seems that somebody has cracked the Rubik's Cube code of organizing Democrats. That not being good enough for us because this can't be just one party's fight. This can't be just one party's victory. That's not good enough for us. We got to have both major parties sign on to being the party of public education. That's what we need. Prioritizing public education does not belong in principle to one party or the other. At the same time, I will tell you, we cannot apologize that one party seems to be fleeing from it just a little bit. This progressive structure is designed to put heat on those that would flee, to find the races in the state that are swing races, where there still can be some play, and apply pressure to the folks that would run for office and be elected from those seats. And it is working. In each of the last two legislative sessions, fewer and fewer crazy bills. Fewer and fewer crazy bills. Now, they get out of committee because committees are crazy, bad crazy, not good crazy, bad crazy. They get out of the committees, but they die because they can't pass the Senate or the House floor. Look at what happened with firearm bills. They were either vetoed or they never made it. These are the airplanes that land safely that you don't necessarily hear about. You don't hear about every nutty idea dying an early death in the legislative process. And maybe that's a good thing. Fewer and fewer anti-labor, anti-union, anti-payroll deduction bills going forward now because they cannot survive. Because there is so much heat being applied through this network. We're paying attention. It has a media hub. It's got a voter awareness and education hub. It's got an express advocacy hub. That means you're playing in somebody's race, and it is both state and nationally funded. It will be a game changer. And it will help put this state back on the path it ought to be. In the legislature, we now have seen what we thought to be inevitable, but is delightful. There is a fracturing of the majority party, and there are two camps. Legislators are shifting their behavior, and you've got this division, which I looked up, and it's scientifically described as the flat earth mouth breathers versus the reality checkers. And we do still have some flat earth mouth breathers, but they are now being thwarted by some of the folks that want to keep Arizona open for business. The session is over. The crazy bills died many deaths. Unfortunately, we're not out of the woods yet. The governor signed 2 voucher expansion bills. I want to say a quick word about that. For a long time, we've been putting a lot of our chips on the space on the roulette wheel of the Supreme Court. And I think a lot of us were hoping for a Supreme Court ruling that said once and for all these ESA voucher debit card schemes are unconstitutional. The Supreme Court will not hear that case. As they said at the Alamo, there will be no help from General Houston. All right? We're on our own. I tell you, I don't like it, but at least we know. Now it's time to take the fight against vouchers as bad public policy where it really belongs, and that's to the legislature. And not hide in behind the solace and hope that maybe the Supreme Court will shine down from heaven above. If the fight needs to be at the legislature, then let's take it to the legislature and let's hold them accountable every time they expand these things. Another asset, the business community is coming around, folks. The business community is paying a lot more attention. It began with their ardent interest in the Common Core standards, upholding those standards. We have tried to drive a message at the state level. If you uphold those standards, then you've got to back the strategies that will make them successful. You can't go halfway down the football field with us. Normally a U of A fan doesn't talk a lot about football. I'm going to branch out. Every great Wildcat fan knows that football season is closely followed by basketball. But it is not enough for the business community to get us through the first 50 yards and then suddenly disappear because they have political favors with some legislators. They've got to go with us all the way into the end zone. They are asking better questions. They are asking deeper questions. The Chamber of Commerce is coming around. Business leaders out of the greater Phoenix leadership area, CEOs, are having tough conversations with legislators saying, what is your plan to invest in these standards now that we have upheld them? They are bringing their attention out of the 60,000-foot range and into the height of 3 to 6 feet where our reality is. So, with that in mind, what are we going to do? Now we've had the optimism that things can actually get better. We confronted the awful, brutal truth. We've talked about reasons to be optimistic. What are we willing to commit to? And the sum total of every way we can act on these positives comes down to membership, yes, but it even more comes down to leadership. We have got to explore dimensions of leadership that perhaps we have not quickly associated with our roles. There are 4 domains of leadership that I think we need to start associating with the very role of being in public education and education support professionals. You're right along with us on this. There's not one of these dimensions that should exclude anybody in the AEA ranks and membership. Leadership is a risk. It leaves you vulnerable because people can read on you what's important to you. Honest leadership is a combination of power and vulnerability. And it simply means having the will to drive your ideals and your values to fruition. And you know as well as I do, because you've got leaders in your sights. They may not carry a position or a title or the authoritative role, but you know they are leaders because of how they wear their values and how they act on them. And I would submit that there's that potential in every single one of you to at least reach out and affect networks where you work and in communities where you live. Leadership isn't a position reserved for a few. It's a capacity that everybody has, just a little bit inside, and it can be developed. If it's a capacity, it can be increased and it can be strengthened. The first kind of leadership we usually acclimate to, and rightfully so, is practice. The leadership of practice. Everybody in this room, I believe, wants to be great at what he or she does. We have to be. Because if we don't have leadership of practice, we really don't have legitimacy. The strongest association leaders at the local level ought to be also regarded as the strongest practitioners. We really should be. It shouldn't be a matter of choosing, do you want a strong association leader or a strong practitioner? We ought to be working constantly to make sure that that is one and the same group, encouraging the people that we think are excellent practitioners to explore dimensions of association leadership. Knowledge and expertise about what we do is our claim, and it's our unique claim. Nobody can match us, but we've got to be able to talk about what makes us experts. We have to be able to dissect things like assessment strategies. We've got to be able to explain to people what the standards are and what they aren't, the difference between standards and curriculum. And every education support professional in the ranks of the AEA membership should unflinchingly be able to explain to somebody how his or her work impacts student learning. It's not that tough to do. You give me any role that an education support professional plays, and we can trace that right to the well-being and the education world we build for students. It is as legitimate as any other role. You don't believe me? Try to educate students comfortably in May or September in an Arizona classroom when the ventilation system is on the fritz. You do not have those students at that time. We have a powerful ally and asset in the Arizona K-12 Center, a professional development hub that is envied in many other states, sort of our sibling, and sometimes there's a little rivalry, and that's a good thing. I like feuding with Kathy Webke, the executive director of the K-12 Center, Arizona's first nationally board certified teacher, by the way, and a proud AEA member. Because the K-12 Center is great at what it does. It's a hub of professional development created largely by and for educators. It is the model of what we ought to aspire to. But AEA is not content to just admire an outside partner. We want to build our own networks of leadership. We're working with NEA on a teacher leadership initiative that will help explore dimensions of leadership. Arizona was one of 9 pilot states, and we'll continue that next year. We also were the only state to put together enough folks to have 2 cohorts in that program. And Joe is one of the 4 coaches working with our cohort members. We have our Priority Learning Network, largely a group of nationally board certified teachers out of our ranks, trained and ready to help in priority schools and districts. And part of our leadership of practice, we have to unapologetically insist that Arizona fully invest in teacher certification. It matters. It's not enough to have content area. Content area is but one leg of a 3-legged stool, and we ought to insist that certification always blend content mastery, pedagogical mastery, and a field experience, a successful field experience, before one is fully certificated. Now that's the one we all start with. I'm going to take you right from that to a couple of minutes on one that most people run from. If you're in this room, you might not. We have to explore the dimension of leadership of policy. Leadership in the awful, bloody, chaotic world of public policy. It can't just be our lobbyist, Jennifer Laredo, going down to the Capitol. She is great at what she does. As with every other AEA staff member, fully committed and a true valuable resource to this organization, but it can't just be her. It can't just be me. I'm a union goon. They don't look at me like an English teacher anymore. They want to slap that union label on me so fast. We got to pull practitioners, raw practitioners, this close to students, to describe what the world looks like so that we can talk intelligently about how every public policy will impact our students. Why are vouchers wrong? Why does the direction we're heading in evaluation right now make no sense? It's taken me a long time to figure this out. Educators don't always like politics. I never saw it coming. And I think I figured out why. When you're in education, you give everything you have to your students. If you know something, you want to share that with your students. Now, you may try to get them to unlock the sequence and to kind of discover it with your help as a cognitive coach. If you're an education support professional, you probably could be making more money in the private sector, but it's important to you to work with students. You give everything you have. You do not withhold information when you're a teacher, or you're not a very good teacher. You may sequence things on a discovery model, but by and large, if a student comes up to you and asks you if there's going to be an exam on Wednesday, you don't very often go, "I'm glad you asked that question," because assessments are a fundamental part of the American dream and promise. And I think we need more exercise. That's a very good question. I'm glad you answered that question. You also don't say things like, "I don't know. I could tell you. What are you going to do for me?" Education is all about disclosure and giving over of the soul. Content area, development, coaching, mentoring, raising. We don't hold back. It's not in our nature. It's not in our DNA. Politics is a hall of mirrors, where sleight of hand rules the day, where I get you to look at what's in my right hand so that you never see what's back here in the left. You don't even ask. I release my information to you strategically, always advantaging myself, always leveraging so I've got just a little bit more information than you do. It's a shell game, and educators don't like to play it. But they are playing it. They're playing it down there at the Capitol. They're playing it in the House. They're playing it in the Senate. They're playing it in every legislative district across the state. And we're either playing or we're getting played. It's that simple. Don't even talk about public education not being political. I would love it if we didn't have to be political. It's not our reality. So we've got to train people to wade into intelligent conversations, be able to scrutinize what they're hearing from legislators, drill down and ask, why this policy? What is your expected benefit on students? And we can do it. The third that we are exploring as an organization is the leadership of organizing, and many of you are well versed in it. We have to unapologetically involve our members in being the solutions to their own problems. The days of a local president having so much free time on her hands where she can just take a phone call and say, I'll solve the problem for you, those are gone. There is more of the professional week eaten up by professional duties in a post-No Child Left Behind, post-Race to the Top world. And everybody's got to be part of the solution. Sometimes we're afraid to talk to members about that. Sometimes we get into this weird dynamic where because they're paying dues, we shouldn't ask them of anything. We shouldn't ask anything of them. They're paying their dues. Sometimes they'll even tell you that. I pay my dues. You solve the problem. Well, you know, on some level that's understandable, and it's not going to work anymore. It hasn't been working for quite a while. And we make people more powerful when we involve them and show them the way to solving their own issues, working with us and with the state as a partner. And lastly, did you catch that? Let my people go. Lastly, you know, it's a privilege to serve in this role. It is. It's a temporary privilege. Well, I'll never have a role more profound in my life than this one because I get to work with you. And when you can't be around because you're doing magical work elsewhere, to be able to have the privilege of speaking for you. But folks, God, you are so powerful, and the people you work with are so powerful. And it's like when we cross the plane of our district borders, too many educators lose their power. We are magnificent at speaking to developing adolescents, the communication codes which are more complicated than the Navajo code talkers. Cracking the code of what makes a 13-year-old go, and you just do it. But when it comes time to speak to community groups and community members, too many of us shy away. We pretend like we don't have any expertise. They don't want to hear from us. I don't have anything to say to them. I understand fear. The first time I ever testified in front of a legislative committee, there was a podium like this. I hate these things now, but there was a podium like this, and my legs were shaking so badly behind it, I thought my voice would be like vibrating because it was traveling up. I know that fear. It goes away. And then you're just left with a really powerful message, and we can bring people around to that. And the thing is that our communities are aching for that. They want a connection with public schools. They want to know who's educating their students. There is an instinctive affinity to the people in whom they trust their students. So leadership in community, critically important. Because if we're silent, our silence gives permission to others to tell our stories. They will speak for us. And that's not good enough because they can't really tell the story of educating students. We cannot turn our stories and our expertise over through silence to anyone. Yes, Arizona has been led astray from a righteous path. I don't shy away from describing public education work as righteous, and if it's not holy, it is at least sacred. Arizona's lost its focus because it's asking the wrong questions. It's asking if public education, how much public education. It's not asking the why of public education. It's a chaotic time, and I will tell you, we have to decide if we're going to be mirrors of the chaos or light, a path, and a promise to a better way and a better day, because that's what public education is. And in all these questions and all these shifts that are going on, you continue to be exclamation points behind three promises that you make to students. You always make to students, and if you stay in this field long enough, if you stay in this work long enough, you will have made those to students who weren't even born yet when you made the promise. The first is that the world needs our students. We have to fundamentally believe that the world will be a better place for the students we help shape, and we have to tell them that. The world needs you. Because we may be the only ones telling them that. Second is that they're going to get their fair chance at the American promise. They deserve their shot. That's why public education, public schools are built where students are, not where market profits dictate. We go where students are, and we create worlds for them. And the third promise is, you're worth our best. My students always used to ask me, Mr. Morrill, why do you teach? Why do you teach? On Fridays, I couldn't remember the answer. I'll get back to you. But the other 4 days, I'd say, well, what should I be doing? Well, you could be doing anything. You could do something else. I said, well, don't you deserve the best? And they'd say, yeah. Well, here I am. You ought to be that cocky. You ought to be that crazy because you're educator crazy. You're the exclamation point. Let the rest of folks be mired around in chaos and controversy and questions that shouldn't even be asked anyway. Stay the exclamation points. Everything you represent is an exclamation point. And when your colleagues stand with you, they are exclamation points, an advocacy of what you do and what you stand for. But that's going to commit us to action that we have to be willing to take, to exercise leadership, to back up that exclamation point, because there are too many question marks in society right now. You're on the right path. We're on the right path. We've just got some path maintenance to do. Educator crazy, the best crazy in town. Anywhere, anytime, anyone. We have got to lead. So let's lead together and build the world we want for our students, for the rest of our tomorrows. Thank you very much.